right. Quite a few years ago, I don't know about you, but I have a bucket list of artists and bands that I want to see live. And quite a few years ago, I had an opportunity to see one of those bands in San Diego at the House of Blues. It was a really small venue. I went with my sister. There were only a couple hundred people there, maybe even less than that. And it was like everyone was just standing on the floor. There were no seats. I was probably 4 rows of people behind the stage. And I know every song ever, every word to every song by this band. And so, of course, I'm, yelling my heart out. I'm singing right along. And probably by the second song, there were these 2 people in front of me who said, you know what, you can just stand in front of us because I was yelling so loud. And in the book of Mark, which is a book all about Jesus, there is a story of a man who also shamelessly cries out, only much more appropriately and honorably, he cries out to Jesus. Now, I know that it's been a really dark season. It's been challenging, and certainly there are these moments of really bright light, and there's joy in between, but it's been really tough and it's been dark. Now, this man I'm talking about, Bartimaeus, he lived in the dark. He was very familiar with darkness, figuratively and literally. He was blind. And as a blind person, he would have been an outcast in society, isolated, a loner, forced to live with the shame of his condition. He could not see, nor was he seen. And the pandemic has given us a glimpse of what it can be like to live an isolating life. Each day, day after day, he sat up alongside the road, the sun beating down on his dry skin, his empty stomach gnawing to no end. He would lay out his coat in front of him, hoping that a few people would throw some coins his way, enough for him to get food for the day. And on this particular morning, there's this level of excitement and energy in the air. He can sense it. And as sounds of crowds of people get louder, his own excitement and anticipation grows because he knows that people are getting closer to him. And surely some of the people in the crowd will have mercy on him. And then he hears someone call Jesus' name. And before he can even think, he shouts, "Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me." If Jesus walked by you today, would you shout out at Jesus? What would you say? Bartimaeus was used to shouting. He was used to shouting at people who were too distracted by their busy lives to pay attention to him. Day after day, he would say, "Please have mercy on me," hoping that people would throw some coins his way. And as he cries out to Jesus, many people yell back at him, "Be quiet." This can't come as a surprise to us. I mean, certainly in our individualistic culture where we worship self-sufficiency, we often despise and reject those who remind us of how unstable the world can be, those who remind us that we aren't actually in control, that we have needs, that we're human. It's far too easy to turn a blind eye, roll up a window, put them on this side of town, pretend like they aren't here, pretend like life is predictable and safe. It's also much easier to silence the voices that challenge and disrupt the status quo, that probe and poke at the things and systems that benefit us, the things that reveal how comfortable our lives really are, our selfishness, pride, and ambition. If you were in this scene today, if you were in this story, would you cry out to Jesus? Or would you be silencing the voices of those who cry out for mercy? I wonder how often we also silence the voice inside of ourselves that's longing to cry out in need. We silence it because we don't think Jesus would answer, or that maybe he would do anything, or that he really sees us. Maybe we silence it because we're afraid of the darkness within ourselves. It's easier to pretend like everything's okay and we're good and we have everything under control. But Bartimaeus is persistent. He isn't afraid of their comments. He isn't afraid of public ridicule or shame. Nothing, no one will keep him from Jesus. He cries out even louder, Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me. And Jesus hears him. Even among a crowd of people with all of the distractions and the noise, Jesus hears him. And he tells the crowd to tell Bartimaeus to come. And so, as the text says in verse 49, says they called the blind man. Ever notice how aspects of who you are that become sources of public shame and exclusion then become who you are? That part of you becomes a title, replaces a name, dehumanizes a person, homeless man, sick man, blind man. And yet Bartimaeus is so much more than that. In fact, his name means son of honor. Cheer up. Today is your lucky day, they say. He is calling you, Bartimaeus. He is calling you. Jesus, the guy that everyone is gathering around, the one who everyone wants to know right now, is calling Bartimaeus. And when Jesus calls, you leave everything behind. And so Bartimaeus springs up from the ground. He leaves behind his occupation, his coat, his spot on the road, his source of income, his old identity and life behind. And then Jesus asks him this intimate, simple, and yet profound question. What do you want me to do for you? How would you answer that question if Jesus asked you that? What do you want me to do for you? Bartimaeus responds, my rabbi. But a better translation would be my great one. He says, my great one, I want to see. Restoring his sight would not only restore his vision, but his status in society, his name, his honor. It would mean a new occupation, a new community, a new life, a new identity. And as devastating and incredibly hard as we can try to imagine it would be to go from having sight to being blind, can you imagine how overwhelming and exciting it would be to go from being blind to being able to see? Jesus responds, your faith has healed you. Your faith, not my power, not the favor or power of someone else. Jesus doesn't say, hey, look, guys, I just made a blind man see. That's pretty cool. He says, your faith. The one who sees us, the one who knows and hears our cries, now heals and gives sight. In Matthew chapter 6, it says, God knows what you need before you even ask. It says, like a good parent, when you ask for bread, God is not going to give you a rock. I recently heard a pastor in a sermon say, if you could summarize the whole chapter, Matthew chapter 6, in one sentence, it would be, God knows. And I would change that slightly to say, God sees. God sees. Hagar, the first woman, the first person in the Bible to give God a name, names God, the God who sees. The one who sees restores sight. And now, what does Bartimaeus do with his sight? He follows Jesus. Of course, he follows Jesus. The text says he follows Jesus on the way. Jesus is going to the cross and Bartimaeus follows. You can tell in Bartimaeus' interactions, in his cries, in the names that he uses to address Jesus, Son of David, Great One, that he loves Jesus. Jesus is everything for Bartimaeus. And the faithfulness of Bartimaeus, his persistence in calling out to Jesus and following him, is even more remarkable when you look at how it stands in stark contrast to the passage immediately before. Because in the previous passage, some of Jesus's disciples, his closest followers, those who were learning from him, wanting to be more like Jesus, who had been with Jesus for quite a long time now, are faced with a similar question. Jesus asks them, "What do you want me to do for you?" Only they ask Jesus for glory, for power, for honor, for fame. They want to be someone. They want to be seen, but not by Jesus. They want all eyes on them. They want to sit next to Jesus on his throne. They enjoy all of the excitement around Jesus, the crowds of people. Long before Jesus even asked the question, a group of them were wondering and arguing over who it would be, who would sit by Jesus at the end. And even before that, Jesus says to them, "Don't you have ears to hear? Don't you have eyes to see?" Oh, the irony. They have yet to understand what the road with Jesus actually looks like, where this road leads, how worthwhile and fulfilling and challenging it is. That it's like this small pearl that's so precious and valuable that anyone who can see it would sell all that they have for it, surely give up fame and glory for it. But I can't help but appreciate that even though their desires are off, even though they're clearly missing it, they too come to Jesus with their request. When was the last time you trusted God and allowed God into your deepest and most practical needs, your deepest desire? I don't mean when was the last time you rationally acknowledged that God could do something about it. I don't mean when was the last time you asked someone else to pray for this or told a friend that you knew God would take care of it. When was the last time you shamelessly cried out to God? Eventually, most of the disciples get it. Eventually, they develop an intimate and loving relationship with Jesus that isn't self serving. Eventually, their desires line up, most of them. I think the beautiful thing about trusting God with our needs and the desires of our heart is that even if they aren't answered, even if our desires get mixed up, even if we want to be seen by others more than we want to be seen by Jesus, in the process, we get more of Jesus. We move closer to the stage. In the process, we become intimately known by the one who sees. This difficult, dark season, I believe, if anything, has provided us with an opportunity to cry out to Jesus, to answer the question, "What do you want me to do for you?" To turn to Jesus for daily bread. I put this quote in your notes. This is from a book by Alan Lewis. And he writes, "Yeah, in a society which idolizes self-sufficiency, has a horror of dependence, and despises those whose misfortunes remind us of our deep neediness. To petition God for daily bread and so acknowledge the limits of our own resources is an act of defiance against the social and spiritual status quo. By coming to God with our needs, we actually challenge the ways of the world, the status quo, the voices that said you are on your own, you have to figure this out, no one's going to take care of you." By coming to God with his needs, Bartimaeus sinks into like this deeper reality where his allegiance is clear. He is not relying on the charity of others day after day. He's not relying on people for daily bread. He turns to Jesus. To cry out to God with our needs is to challenge the way that the world works. Recently, I was talking to a friend of mine who has had some chronic health issues since she was in an accident, a car accident a few years ago. And she told me that all these things keep coming up. And at one point, she was seeing her doctor and there was something in her body that needed to be removed. And she told her doctor, "Okay, I'm totally willing to have the surgery, but first I want my church to pray for me." And so she went and had the church pray for her. And then when she went to do the ultrasound, it was gone. And when I asked her if I could share this story, she said, "Sure." And the crazy thing is that this has happened to me twice because I was actually also having issues with my back. And the same thing happened when the church prayed for me. I just finished a book about the early church, and if you haven't heard me talk about it, I'm sure you'll hear me talk about it a lot more. It's called The Patient Ferment of the Early Church. And in it, the author talks about how prayer was the church's heartbeat. This is the church after the death and resurrection of Jesus. And the author claimed that outsiders, people who are not a part of the church, wanted to be admitted into the church specifically so that they could pray with believers, because they were conscious of a special power that was palpable. They just wanted to be a part of the prayer meetings. And because the people believed that God answered prayers, they took risks. They lived lives that were eventful and imprudent, and that they walked into situations that could get them into hot water. Now, I'm not saying that we should just like ignore doctors' recommendations, or that we should forget all kinds of rationality. Not at all saying that. God works in a lot of ways through a lot of different modalities, and sometimes our prayers aren't answered. I'm also saying that I can't help but wonder if part of the opportunity that we have in this season is to petition God for daily bread. That we're living in a situation that is so challenging and uncomfortable that the opportunity is to turn to God day after day for our needs, to cry out to God so shamelessly, so persistently, so vulnerably, that we actually move closer to Jesus than we ever have been. Because as incredibly devastating as it is when our prayers are not answered, even when we cry out to God, even when we express our anger and our frustration with how God is responding, we move closer to Jesus. Now, this is normally when we would break out into groups, but instead I want to give you 5 minutes to respond on your own to this. And so if you have a piece of paper or you want to open up a new note in your phone, I invite you to take like 5 or 6 minutes just to write out a vulnerable response to God. What is it right now in your situation? What is it that you need? What do you want God to do for you? What makes you really angry? What is frustrating? What breaks your heart? What is this sermon or this passage prompting in you? Just write out like an honest response. Use colorful language if you have to. God can handle it. So I'm just going to give you 5 minutes to go ahead and do that. And then we'll come back together. Prayer can be weird and challenging. And I found this like great outline for intercessory prayer in a book called Soul Feast that I included in your notes. And again, you don't have to follow everything step by step, but there may be some points that make you think, oh, I've never done that before, or I haven't had that perspective. And I'm going to send you with a blessing. But before that, I just want to pray for Michelle, if that's okay, as she's about to have her baby, hopefully very, very soon. So let's just pray for Michelle. God, thanks so much for Michelle, and even just for connecting her to Reunion. I know that she's been such a joy and blessing to this community and people in the community. And God, we just pray for this baby to come soon and quick. And Lord, that everything will go smoothly. If she has any anxieties, God, I just pray that your spirit would come and comfort and bring peace, that she would have everything that she needs in this process, and that she would experience you walking with her even as the baby is born and grows up. And God, we also pray that her child would come to know you as a good and loving God. And we pray these things in your name. Amen.